If you want to create a shape for a particular object like a butterfly or a dog, I would highly recommend just finding a picture on the internet and using your selection tools to build on top of that shape. So I'm going to show you two examples. The butterfly I picked because it has a high contrast between it and the background, which means I could use one of my edge selection tools or several of my edge selection tools. I'm going to grab my quick select and just run over it super quick and see what happens. Holding down Option to get rid of the little bits. I did this just a minute ago and it was not this messy. So I have the main selection done, and I'll probably grab my regular lasso tool to come in and just fix a couple of these little edges that look a little weird. The wonderful thing about making what's called a silhouette is as long as the end result looks right, it's good. Whoever's looking at it won't have the original image to compare it to, so as long as the end looks good, we know we're on a good track. So I have this selection made. Whenever you use the quick selection, unfortunately it tends to have some jaggedy edges, so I would recommend pretty much always using the Refine Edge tool when you're done. So you can see the quality of this edge is not great. I'm going to fix this the way I normally do. I usually will increase the smoothness, which will make kind of a fuzzy smooth edge, and then you increase the contrast, which will make that edge more crisp. And I look at the thing and say, okay, does it look like the right size? If it needs to be just a little bit thinner or a little bit wider, I can shift the edge a little bit and then say okay. Once you've made your selection, it's useful to hide the image layer but not get rid of it in case you need to come back to it. Create a new layer and fill it with color or gradient or whatever you're working with. Now a butterfly is essentially a mirror image, so one of the tricks you can use if the thing is the same on both sides is to grab your rectangular marquee tool and get rid of whichever side you don't like the look of more and just work on improving the side that is left. So at this point you could either stick with this or you could come in with a couple of your tools and just clean up the edges just a little bit. So here where this is really lumpy, I'm adding a selection that I can fill in with some more color on this same layer. And then this is kind of a weird shape, so I'm going to come in here and take that away. I'm holding down Option so that I can switch between my lasso tools, which I find to be quite useful. And then I'm going to round these out. Now it's kind of hard to draw a good round shape with your lasso. So instead of using the lasso, I'll use the Elliptical Marquee tool and use it to create a round edge, and I'm using spacebar to move it around to line it up with the rest of the wing. And then just hit delete, or not delete, I'm sorry, Option delete to fill and Command D to deselect. And I can do the same thing but the other way around. If I think I want this cutout to look more like a true curve, I can use the edge of a elliptical marquee there. So I think you get the idea. You can see how that would go on. If you wanted to build color on top of this, that would be an option, but I'm going to show you how to copy it over so that we've got both sides. You know, looking at this, I think this shape is still really weird, so I'm going to just grab my lasso and smooth that thing off a little bit. Much better. Take your rectangular marquee tool, create a selection around the entire object that we're going to duplicate, and then hold down Command and Option, click and drag, which will make a copy. Now if you hold down Shift while you're holding all of those, it'll keep it exactly where it needs to be. Transform, you can do that under Edit, Transform, or Command T. And then right click and you should have a flip horizontal option. then all you got to do is move this around until it looks like it's where it needs to be, and deselect. Now by doing it that way instead of copy pasting, it's all on the same layer, and I can build up more layers of color if I want to, just like we did with the jewel. I could grab my my gradient tool and add more detail, make it look a little nicer. Pretty much anything you wanted to have on both sides I would recommend doing before you duplicate it. So if I had patterns and things, I would do that on both sides. Alright, so that's enough for that one. Let's look at this thing, because in reality it's not a great image. If I zoom in, you can see that it is quite pixelated and there's not great definition between the background and the fur, and fur's hard to pick in the first place anyway. So when you're working on a complicated shape like this and building a solid shape or silhouette from it, what I would recommend is creating a new layer, grabbing your lasso tool, and running around the edge with your lasso tools and simplifying where you can. So what I mean by that, I just did what I hate the most about the lasso tool. I double clicked instead of hanging on, and it closed my selection, which is just one of those hazards of the lasso tool. Fortunately, in another week or so we will be looking at the vector tools with the pen tool, which will help you get around that problem. Alright, so when you're at things like fur, what I mean by simplify is don't trace around every single little bit of fur. So here I'm going, okay, well there's a clump, and there's a clump, and there's a clump, and there's a clump. Now if I keep holding down forever, my fingers are going to start to hurt. So what I usually will do is make an area selection that's not the entire thing and just fill it in with a color. It can even be a placeholder color. And then deselect and move on to the next bit. And just kind of like I was coloring in with a marker, do just a little bit at a time instead of trying to do the whole thing in one clean sweep. And hopefully by the time I'm done it will look like a dog. So I think you get the idea with that. When you are done, the main thing is to make sure you can tell what the shape is. Silhouettes are not tell stories, but silhouettes can really give a lot of information about whatever object they are, but it depends on what pose the object is. So this is a dog, and we can tell that because he's in profile, but if the dog were curled up in a ball on the floor and this photo was from overhead, it might be a little harder to tell what that is. So when you do have a project that you are creating specific shapes for, it's usually a good idea to pick your picture with that in mind, thinking, okay, if this shape was all black, would I be able to tell what it is? The other thing you can do with silhouettes is, again, because the original photo is not going to be around, you can smooth things out if you don't like the way that the colored area looks. So this dog's got some ruffly areas on his back that I think looked kind of weird. If you happen to have a graphics tablet, such as a Wacom, you might want to try this with a Wacom, because doing freehand lasso selections is a lot easier with an actual Wacom pen than trying to do this with a mouse. And my mouse is actually okay. It's an ergonomic one that's set up to be sort of like a PC mouse, where it's got the right click, and it gives me a little more control than that terrible white mouse that an Apple comes with. If you have that white mouse, honestly, I would recommend go get you a nice ergonomic mouse for 20 or 30 bucks and throw the white one away. The white one will hurt your hand. Alright, so here's our finished black silhouette, and I can turn off the layer just like we did with the butterfly, so we're left with the silhouette. Now this is where you can be inventive and say, okay, well, what looks like a dog and what doesn't look like a dog. I think his face looks kind of weird. So at this point you could either freehand and try and fix it and say, okay, well, I think that's what looks weird and now it looks more like a dog. Or you can go find a different picture of a dog head and bring in and place there and trace over that different part. I'm going to give you an example of this because I feel like this fellow really needs a tail. This makes it look like his back leg is really fat. So this is a golden retriever. Let's just type in tail and see what happens. Hopefully we don't get anything inappropriate. Or at least here I can look at a tail and see what a dog in that stance might actually have his tail doing. Okay, well, I'm not a dog person particularly, so I'm going to guesstimate just from looking. So just looking around, I don't really... Oh, look, there's one. Okay. I was going to say I can't really see one that will work. Here's one that is not a great photo again, but because we are creating a new selection, it doesn't need to be a great photo. So instead of needing it to be a great photo, I just need to have it be the right shape. So I've made this a little bigger, and I'm going to make it a little bit transparent so that I can kind of line it up and make sure that the proportion looks okay. And again, this is just something you have to eyeball. Alright, so I think I like how that tail looks. I'm going to come back to my silhouette layer and continue with my selection and maybe add a little bit more fur down here so that it looks like what I thought I was doing on the other side. Okay, well, I hope that makes sense. That is how you can, with your selection tools, create silhouette shapes, and you can combine multiple pictures to create any shape that you want.